I very much paint for the tabletop and not for display, because I actually like playing the games that I'm painting the models of, and so often I have a lot of models that I need to paint. This means I don't tend to paint non-metallic metal, because honestly it would just take way too long, and it's far easier just to do a true metallic metal. So I had to work out a formula, a recipe, to create reliable but relatively good true metallic metal effects that would quite pop out of the model when it's on the tabletop into sort of bad lighting environments. And this is the formula that I've come up with. I thought I'd share it with you now. I'm going to show you this as an example on a Raider in Power Armor from Matthias Games' Fallout Wasteland Warfare, because it just happened to be something that I had base coated laying around. But it's quite a good model to do it on because it has lots of raised edges and lots of places where you want quite sharp contrast between light and dark. I'm going to do this using Citadel paints, not because I have any particular love of Games Workshop's paints. In fact, I hate them. There's nothing wrong with the paints as such, but the pots that they come in are just insufferable, and I don't know why they haven't arrived in the 21st century and started using dropper bottles. But I personally find that Games Workshop's metallic paints are second to none, and they have a particular kind of staging effect that are really, really useful and easy for doing this kind of true metallic metal. So here I am, just blocking in base iron warriors all over the metallic parts of this miniature. And for anyone wondering, no, this isn't actually how I would paint it when it comes to Fallout Wasteland Warfare. Her armor wouldn't be nearly as shiny as it is, but I'm just doing this for the sake of the demonstration. Once that is done, yes, I am breaking out the Nuln Oil. Now, Nuln Oil is something that is a bit of a crutch in most circumstances, but is actually a necessary step in this procedure because of a particular property that Nuln Oil itself has. It's not very dark, it's not itself very shaded, and it covers quite consistently because it's quite thin and you can drag it around all over the model. So we will be giving him the entire Baron Harkonnen bath in Nuln Oil, but with good reason, because what we want to do is essentially make matte the otherwise reflective and shiny surface that is left by the base Iron Warriors. What we want is for the metal colour to simply just be a metal colour, rather than something that is in of itself shiny and metallic. And so we're actually using the Nuln Oil to take away that particular property, with the positive side effect of also darkening any recesses. So once your model is suitably drenched in Nuln Oil, and quick reminder, make sure you shake and mix the Nuln Oil very thoroughly so it doesn't become reflective in the cavities and creases. We'll let it dry and then we'll come back to him. You'll notice that the entire thing is now a very dull, uninspiring, matte grey that does pick up the light slightly because of whatever metallic comes through the Nuln Oil. But I mean, this is being shown to you under a very bright directional light, and even under that, it's not very reflective, which is perfect. This is exactly what we want. Next, we want to go even darker, and so we're going to find something that is a darker and thicker version of Nuln Oil. Now, you could just do repeated layers of Nuln Oil, but it ends to kind of look a bit grey. So it's better to choose something that just has a darker tone, such as Citadel's Contrast Black Legion or Army Painter's Dark Tone. For this video, I'll use Citadel's Contrast Black Legion, which is pretty good because it's kind of a pure black colour. You could use Black Templar, but that's got a bit of blue in it, and when you start watering it down, the blue becomes quite evident. Anyway, so put some Contrast Black Legion on your wet palette, and yes, you should get a wet palette. Mix it down with just water, or I suppose Lamy and medium if you have some. I'm not nearly that professional. Until it's got the consistency of a medium wash. You want it to have pretty good coverage, but you want it to blob like it's doing here. This is actually a necessary feature that we're looking for when it comes to the next step. So now take quite a generous amount of the Contrast Black Legion wash that you've just made up and apply it to the deepest recesses on the model. Try to avoid going over the raised areas that you have already covered in Nuln Oil. Do it in the sort of areas that you don't want to catch sunlight, or at least the bits that you don't want to be highly reflective at any point. Those bits that essentially you want to suck up the light to remain dark no matter what angle the model is viewed from. As you can see here, I'm doing it on the sides of the legs, or the underside of the thigh, where light, if looked from above, wouldn't naturally catch. Make sure that you're being very aware of the angle that the light you're expecting to come from is coming onto the model. So on the backs of his calves, where you see his legs bent and the light would naturally hit, I'm not going over that. But underneath the thighs in particular on this one, you can see that that's where the light, of course, wouldn't naturally hit. So go quite heavy on those sorts of areas. Once that's done, you can see that there are now different tones of grey and darkness on the model, and there are some parts of the model that just don't ever really become bright, even when the strong overhead light that I have above my head is shining directly on the model and on those parts. The model retains a lot of darkness on it, and that's really great because that's what's going to create the really high contrast between those areas we've blackened down and those areas that we're about to lighten up. On your wet palette, now thin down some Iron Warriors and then paint it on those raised areas of the metal plates that you want to catch the light. Now, the reason you thin this down is so you create a kind of gradient coming out of the darkness and into what will be the light areas. But once you've got the technique down and once you know exactly how much you need to thin it down by, you realize this is actually a really, really quick process and it gets the job done really, really well. As you can see here from that plate that I was just painting, it just pours off the brush exactly as you want it. So go around the entire model just doing those areas that you want to be bright because of their position on the model. Again, look specifically where you want the light to hit. Use your own light to help you here, and then just highlight where the light is when you're looking at it from, say, above or something like that. As you can see, the backs of the legs on this is a very easy thing to choose. The light itself sort of demands where you should go and highlight, so it makes the job very, very easy. You don't have to be very careful or gentle with this process either. You can basically just drag your brush around any of the raised areas, and anything it contacts with will basically be where you are most likely to want the light to be. So you can be quite aggressive with this and still come out with very, very good results. As you can see here, I'm just flicking the brush across it, as if almost like a heavy dry brush to get the correct effect. And it's, like I said, it's very quick, saves you a lot of time, and it just comes out the same every single time. Then get Base Iron Hand Steel, which is the next kind of tonal step up from Base Iron Warriors, and creates a very nice bright steel colour. Put this basically where you'd put the Base Iron Warriors from a moment ago, and just be quite aggressive about it, really. You don't have to thin this down very much either. This is where you want the light to be captured. So on all of those other parts, you've gone out of your way to deny the ability of the light to really shine on them. And now this is the part where you're giving permission for the light to shine. So go along all of those bits that you've done with Base Iron Warriors, but don't cover the entire part. So you've got this sort of nice gradient that goes from the darkness into the light. And especially do the tops of things. As you can see here, I'm doing the tops of this kind of band that goes around his knees, or her shins, sorry. And you'll notice that it comes out with a very powerful reflection that feels quite natural. The whole thing tends to then sort of come together without you having to, again, do very much work at all. Just do a few of the highlights, do a few of the top areas, and you'll see that it just springs out at you. When it comes to bits that are basically just flat, reflective surfaces at a different angle, like that particular bit there, it's very easy to get that right. You just literally block it all in, and that will take care of itself. But when it comes to the sort of cylindrical shape, like on the back of the legs, do try to be a bit more careful with it. Otherwise, you will end up with a bit more of a step than you're happy with. For example, as you can see there, there's quite a block there, and I've had to go back to it to kind of smooth that out a bit and drag it into the middle to try and thin it off a bit there. But it comes out okay in the end. If you just be a little bit diligent on the cylinders. But once you've done that, then the bulk of it is done. As you can see, the light is very light on those places where you wanted it to be light. But it's also pitch black in those places where you didn't want the light to come out, or almost pitch black. And so you've got very much a powerful command of the light, no matter what angle that you're looking at the model from. And this allows it to look very striking and contrasting, no matter what kind of angle a person approaches it. The final thing to do is just some edge highlighting with Layer Runefang Steel. This is very, very bright steel colour and complements the rest of the model very, very well. As you can see, it's really just as simple as putting a thin layer on the edges themselves. This will be a kind of extra bright glare that will catch the eye when the model rotates, and it'll just really make it stand out even more than it otherwise would. This is where the real pop comes from, because it effectively looks like pure white when you're looking at it. Once you've gone over those, especially the particularly straight edges that are right next to other parts that you have darkened down sufficiently, you'll realise that you've got an incredibly strong contrast from basically black to white across the model. But as the model rotates and as you move it, the light flows across it sort of naturalistically, and so it doesn't look artificial. With the cylinders, such as on the legs here, make sure you just do sort of a thin layer where the light is meant to be brightest. Essentially what you're doing is giving the light permission to have a particular point of focus, so it will be bright if it's not directly at an angle that would reflect from that brightest point into the viewer's eye, but it won't be as bright as when that does rotate around, and so it'll flash when they're looking at it. And so this is the final effect, and you might think, okay, well, this is just silver, what's the problem? But if this had just been the base Iron Warriors coating, all of the recesses would also be very bright, because I've got two very bright lights facing this. You wouldn't see any black, really, on this. It would be very, very bright. But because of this technique, I've managed to capture quite a lot of darkness on the model, and that's what you're going for. But by comparison, on the bright bits, you've got incredibly bright bits that are just almost pure white at some angles, which I think is good. I think that's an attractive thing to have. And honestly, this took me probably about 2 hours to do this entire model. Normally you wouldn't have to spend so much time doing it, because of course you don't paint almost all of the model in silver like I've done with this. So this is a really quick process, all things considered. Here's that same process on a fully painted model. As you can see, I've also done some parts in bronze, beginning with Layer Castellax Bronze, then washes of Agrax Earthshade, and highlights up to Sycorax Bronze, which makes the very highlight bits go, again, almost white, but suits the right tone for the bronze itself. But yeah, I'm very pleased with this process, because like I said, it is actually really easy to do, and it saves a lot of time. I'm sure you could do incredible things with non-metallic metal. I just don't have that amount of time, and so I'm looking for something that looks good on the tabletop. And these generally look pretty good. This produces really reliable results, which is what I'm after, because I want a fairly good standard of tabletop miniature. I'm not painting for Golden Demon or anything. I'm not really a very good painter, but this allows me to get lots of models knocked out to the same consistent standard, so I can be quite happy with the way they look on the table. I hope you found this helpful, and if you try it out, do leave me a comment down below. And if you've got any advice on how we can improve this technique, let me know, because I'm always looking to improve.